That ugly ditch is gone by Friday. That's what Cynthia Vale, president of the Lake Briar HOA, told me while an excavator dumped its first load of dirt into the drainage channel beside my property. I asked her one question: where's your stormwater permit? She looked down at my muddy work boots, then back at the contractor like I wasn't worth answering. This is a beautification project, Daniel. And we don't need permission from someone who is even part of our community. She was right about one thing: I was part of her HOA, but that ditch wasn't hers to fill. It sat inside a recorded drainage and stormwater easement that had been carrying runoff through that hillside for decades. And after 30 years working around excavation, grading, culverts, and drainage systems, I knew exactly what could happen if somebody blocked it. So I didn't yell, I didn't stand in front of the excavator. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Then I went home, opened the county records, and sent Cynthia a warning. In writing, she ignored it 6 weeks later during the first major spring storm. I stood in pouring rain, watching muddy water climb toward the doors of their $10 million clubhouse. By midnight, the lower level was flooding. Electrical equipment was being shut down. And Cynthia was standing in ankle-deep water, screaming at me to do something. But the flood wasn't what finally destroyed her authority. That had already happened 6 weeks earlier. She just didn't know it yet, because the document that would strip away every excuse she had was sitting in her own inbox, and she had already replied to it. The ditch had been there longer than most of the houses in Lake Briar Estates. It was too pretty in summer. Weeds grew along the banks after a hard rain. Brown water rushed through it for a few hours before disappearing into the lower drainage system beyond my property. Most people saw an ugly trench. I saw exactly what it was built to do. My father bought our place more than 30 years ago, before Lake Briar became a gated neighborhood with stone entrances, tennis courts, landscaped medians, and a clubhouse that looked more like a private resort than a community center. He never cared much about appearances. He cared about whether something worked. Whenever I complained as a kid about the ditch cutting across the edge of the property, he would say the same thing. Never fight where the water wants to go. I understood that better after spending most of my adult life around excavation, grading, stormwater work, and failed drainage jobs. Water always finds the low point. And if you block that low point, you better know exactly where the water is going next. For decades, nobody touched that ditch. Then Cynthia Vale became president of the Lake Briar HOA. Cynthia liked things clean, symmetrical, polished, and expensive. Within her first few months, new decorative signs went up, old shrubs were replaced, streetlights were repainted. She pushed through a landscaping budget that some residents quietly complained about, but most people let it go. Then she announced her biggest project yet, the Briar Promenade. A landscaped walking path connecting the clubhouse to the lake. According to the HOA newsletter, it would improve pedestrian safety, raise property values, and, in their words, eliminate an unsightly drainage feature along the western boundary. That last sentence stopped me. I walked outside and followed the ditch toward the clubhouse. There were fresh orange stakes in the ground. Pink survey ribbon, white spray paint crossing the channel. At first I assumed they planned to build a small bridge over it. That would have made sense. Then I saw the elevation marks. The path wasn't going over the ditch. It was going directly through it. The next morning, 2 dump trucks rolled onto HOA property. Behind them came an excavator, and standing beside it in white boots and oversized sunglasses was Cynthia. That was when I realized they weren't planning to cross the drainage channel. They were planning to erase it. I walked to the edge of my property before the excavator started moving dirt. Cynthia was standing beside the contractor with a rolled set of plans under one arm and a coffee cup in the other. "Morning," I said. "Who is handling the stormwater review?" She turned slowly. Like I had interrupted something important. "The what?" "The drainage review for the channel." She gave me a small smile. "This is landscaping, Daniel." I pointed toward the ditch. That channel carries runoff from the entire upper slope. If you re-putting fill across it, somebody needs to account for the flow." The contractor looked down at the plans. Cynthia didn't. "We've already addressed the safety concerns," she said. "The ditch is a mosquito problem. It's dangerous for children, and frankly, it hurts the appearance of the community." There it was. Safety, property values, community standards, the words people use when they want something to sound more official than it really is, I asked again. Who signed the drainage plan? Her smile disappeared. Our professionals have reviewed the project. Which engineer? She looked me up and down. Mud on my boots, dust on my jeans, my old work jacket. Then she laughed. Not loudly, just enough to make sure the contractor heard it. Daniel, you dig holes for a living. We hired professionals. I had spent more than 30 years around excavation crews. Culverts, grading plans, stormwater systems, and failed drainage work. I had watched contractors make six-figure mistakes because somebody ignored where water naturally wanted to travel. But Cynthia didn't know any of that, and I didn't feel like explaining my resume to someone who had already decided what I was worth, so I nodded. Okay, that seemed to surprise her. She expected an argument. Instead, I turned around and walked back to my house. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't threaten the HOA. I didn't post anything online. I went into the back room where my father had kept old tax records. Property documents and maps from before Lake Briar Estates existed. There was a metal filing cabinet against the wall that I hadn't opened in years, the bottom drawer stuck halfway out. I pulled harder. Inside were old plats, survey sheets, utility records, and a yellowed envelope containing the original subdivision documents. I spread everything across the kitchen table. And about 10 minutes later, I found the line Cynthia's professionals apparently hadn't bothered to look for. It ran directly through the ditch. Beside it were 4 words, drainage and stormwater easement. That was when this stopped being a disagreement about landscaping. The easement was T, vague. It was T, a handwritten note from 50 years ago. It was recorded. I pulled up the county property database and found the same drainage corridor on the official plat. Then I found an older stormwater plan. Same line, same location, same channel. The language was simple. The drainage route was to remain open and unobstructed unless properly modified through the required review process. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour, comparing the maps to what I had seen outside. The new walkway crossed directly over the protected drainage route, not beside it, not near it. Directly over it, I printed 3 copies of the plat. Then I wrote a short letter to the HOA. No threats, no accusations, just facts. I identified the recorded drainage easement, included the county reference information, and explained that filling the channel could restrict stormwater flow and create flooding upstream or downstream of the project. I asked them to stop work until a licensed engineer reviewed the design and the county confirmed whatever approvals were required. Then I sent it 3 ways: email, certified mail, and a copy to the property management office. I wanted a record showing exactly what I had told them and exactly when I had told them. The next afternoon, I received delivery confirmation. Someone at the HOA office had signed for the envelope that mattered, because from that moment forward, nobody could honestly say the HOA had never been warned. I expected construction to pause. Maybe for a day, maybe for a week. I expected someone to call and ask for the documents. Nobody did. Instead, Cynthia sent me a 2-line email. Thank you for your concern. The board has already approved the project. That was it. No engineer's name, no permit number, no explanation of where the stormwater would go, just board approval. 2 mornings later, I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when I heard the low rumble of diesel engines outside. I looked through the window. 3 dump trucks were coming down the HOA service road. The first stopped beside the drainage channel. Its bed lifted and several tons of crushed fill began sliding straight into the ditch. I grabbed my phone and walked outside. He misunderstood my warning. They had read it, they had signed for it, and they had decided to bury the drainage channel anyway. I started recording before the first truck finished unloading. The contractor crew moved quickly. 1 excavator pushed the crushed fill into the channel while another machine spread and compacted it. Within 20 minutes, a section that had carried stormwater for decades was disappearing under dirt. I stayed on my side of the boundary. I didn't touch anything, I just filmed. The foreman eventually noticed me and walked over. "You got a problem with the work?" "I've got a question," I said. "Did they give you the drainage plans?" He frowned. "The site plans in the trailer." "I am not asking about the walkway plan. I am asking about the stormwater design, culverts, flow calculations, whatever they reusing to keep this drainage route open." He looked back at the excavator. Then at me, that S above my pay grade. That answer told me more than he probably realized. A few minutes later, Cynthia arrived in her white SUV. She got out holding the same blue folder I had seen before. What are you doing now? She asked, documenting the work. You need to stop harassing our contractors. I haven't stopped anyone. I pulled one of the county plats from my jacket and held it out. This is the drainage easement I wrote to you about. She barely looked at it. Our attorney has already reviewed the project. Great! Which engineer signed off on the drainage modification? Her jaw tightened. Daniel, this is HOA property. Part of that easement runs along my boundary. You are not authorized to interfere with board-approved construction. I am not interfering. I raised my phone. I am recording. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she leaned closer. You are making this much bigger than it needs to be. I remember that sentence because she was right. Just not in the way she meant. By the end of the day, the crew had filled nearly the entire open section near the proposed walkway. 2 days later, they compacted it. Then came gravel. Then forms for the pavers. That evening, I received a letter from the HOA's management company accusing me of interfering with an authorized community improvement and warning me not to enter the construction area. I read it twice. I wasn't an HOA member. I hadn't entered their construction area, and I hadn't interfered with anything. So instead of getting angry, I added the letter to a folder. Then I added the video, then the certified mail receipt, then Cynthia's email, because by that point this was me, just about whether the walkway was a bad idea. They had been warned. They knew the drainage easement existed, and they were building over it anyway. I could have argued with Cynthia every day until the project was finished. That would have made her happy. People like Cynthia are comfortable in arguments. They know how to talk over people, how to turn every disagreement into a question of attitude, compliance, or community behavior. So I stopped arguing. I started documenting. I took photographs from the same 3 locations every morning, and every evening I recorded the fill level, the equipment, the truck numbers. The sections of the old ditch disappearing beneath the new grade. I saved every email, every delivery receipt, every notice the management company sent me. Then, I mounted a small security camera on the corner of my garage where it could see the drainage area without looking into anyone's home. I wanted a clean timeline, not opinions, not memories, a record. Next, I called the county stormwater office. I gave them the parcel number, the easement reference, and the location of the work. The woman on the phone was quiet for a few seconds while she searched their system. Then she asked me something that got my attention. Do you have a permit number for the modification? No. Did the HOA give you one? No. Another pause. She told me she couldn't make a determination over the phone. But she also couldn't find an active stormwater review matching the work I described. She opened a complaint and said somebody would inspect the site. That should have slowed Cynthia down. It did the opposite. The HOA had a spring member gala coming up, and the new promenade was supposed to be the centerpiece. Within days, the crew was working longer hours. The fill was compacted. Pavers arrived. Decorative stone went in. Then lighting crews started trenching beside the new path. Cynthia wanted the walkway finished before anybody from the county could tell her to stop. I still wasn't completely sure how bad the drainage problem would be. So one afternoon, after the workers left, I took out an old laser level and checked the new grade from my side of the boundary. I measured it twice. Then a third time, the finished walkway sat noticeably higher than the old bottom of the drainage channel, high enough to block the natural route water had followed for decades. I stood there looking at the numbers for a long time. That was the moment I stopped thinking of it as a walkway, because they hadn't simply covered the ditch, they had built a dam. 3 days after I checked the grade, the weather forecast changed. What had started as a normal spring rain system was now expected to stall over our area for most of the weekend. Nothing historic, nothing anybody was calling a disaster, just hours of steady, heavy rain. Exactly the kind of weather a drainage system is supposed to handle. I checked the channel again Thursday morning. The old flow path was gone. In its place was compacted fill, decorative stone, and a nearly finished walkway with low landscaping walls on both sides. There was no open path for the water to pass through. So I sent one more email. This time I kept it even shorter. I wrote that significant rainfall was forecast, that the established drainage channel remained obstructed, and that the HOA should have the site reviewed immediately before the storm arrived. I attached the county plat again. I copied Cynthia, the property manager, the board, and the contractor. Then I waited. About an hour later, Cynthia replied, "Please stop attempting to frighten residents over a landscaping project." That was the entire response. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then I printed it. I put the email in the same folder as the certified letter, the photographs, and the county complaint number. I didn't feel victorious, honestly. I hoped I was wrong. Flooding sounds satisfying when you talk about it after the fact. It is tea. Water destroys walls, wiring, furniture, records, and sometimes people's homes. The residents living in Lake Briar hadn't made this decision. Cynthia had, and I had no interest in seeing innocent people pay for her ego. But there was nothing legal I could do that afternoon to tear out somebody else's construction. The county complaint was already open. The warnings had been sent. The record was clear, so I did the only thing left to do. I prepared my own property. I cleared debris from the sections of drainage still open on my side. I checked the culvert farther downhill. I moved a few things out of my lower shed and made sure my sump pump was working. Across the property line, the HOA crew kept working by Friday afternoon. They were installing decorative path lights. Cynthia walked the promenade with two board members, pointing at flower beds and talking about the gala. The sky behind them was turning gray. By 6:00, the first rain started falling, and for the first 2 hours, nothing happened. That was almost worse, because it gave Cynthia time to believe she had been right. By 8:00, the rain had settled into a steady wall. Not violent, just relentless, the kind of rain that sounds harmless until you realize it hasn't stopped for hours. I walked outside with a flashlight and checked the upper end of the old drainage route. Water was already gathering where the channel used to open. At first, it was only a shallow pool. By 9, it had doubled. By 10, runoff from the entire slope was feeding into the same low area, but the water had nowhere to go. The new promenade sat across the flow like a curb stretched across the hillside. I started recording. Not because I wanted to be right, because I knew what Cynthia would say if something happened. She would call it unexpected, unprecedented, an act of nature. So I filmed the water level, then I filmed the walkway, then I filmed the nearly dry ground beyond it. That contrast mattered. Upstream the water was rising. Downstream almost nothing was moving. Around 10:30, I called the county non-emergency number and reported a blocked drainage route with active ponding near the clubhouse. They logged it. I stayed on my property. I didn't touch the walkway. I didn't move the landscaping stones. I didn't dig a trench through their new path. It crossed my mind. Of course it did. One cut through the fill might have released some of the pressure. But after all the warnings, all the letters, and all the accusations that I was interfering with their project, the last thing I was going to do was give Cynthia a chance to blame me for damaging it. So I watched. At 11:15, the water reached the edge of the promenade. It spread sideways, first, then farther uphill. The ground around the path became saturated. Water started slipping around the lowest end of the new landscaping wall. I knew the terrain well enough to understand what that meant. If the channel was gone, the runoff would search for the next lowest route, and there was only one major low point between that slope and the road. The clubhouse parking lot. I walked farther down my property line and shined the flashlight toward the building. The clubhouse sat a few hundred feet away, its lower level tucked into the grade. The parking lot was still dry. For the moment then, just before midnight, I saw a thin stream of muddy water crossing the grass toward the first row of parking spaces. It was only a few inches wide. Almost nothing. But it was moving fast. I remember standing there in the rain and thinking about my father. Never fight where the water wants to go. The HOA had spent weeks pretending a board vote could change gravity. It could water does read meeting minutes. It does care about community standards, and it definitely does care how much your clubhouse cost. By midnight, the first parking space was underwater. By 12:30, the parking lot wasn't taking water anymore. It was holding it. The first row disappeared beneath a sheet of brown runoff, and every few minutes the water pushed farther toward the clubhouse. That was when the maintenance crew finally arrived. 2 pickup trucks came in from the main entrance, with their hazard lights flashing. A third vehicle pulled up behind them, Cynthia's white SUV. She stepped out into ankle-deep water, wearing a raincoat over clothes that looked like she had come straight from some dinner event, for the first time since the project started. She didn't. T looked annoyed. One of the maintenance guys ran toward the lower entrance and came back shouting that water was collecting at the basement stairwell. Another man was trying to move patio furniture and portable equipment away from the doors. Then Cynthia saw me standing near the property line. "Daniel." I didn't answer right away. She pushed through the water toward me. "You know this stuff. Do something." I looked at the promenade. Water was stacked behind it, spreading across the slope and spilling around both ends. "I told you what needed to be done 6 weeks ago. This is the time for that? No. It was the time 6 weeks ago. I could have walked away. I did the people inside that clubhouse weren't responsible for Cynthia's decisions. So I called emergency dispatch again and told them the lower level of a community building was taking water and that electrical equipment might be involved. Then I warned the maintenance crew not to enter any flooded electrical rooms. Within minutes, people were moving out of the lower level. The fire department arrived not long after that. By then, water was pushing through the basement access. It ran down the stairwell first. Then under the service doors, the sump pumps came on, but they were never designed to handle runoff from an entire hillside. The water rose faster than they could remove it. Boxes in the storage area started floating. The fitness room took water. Mechanical controls in the lower level had to be shut down. Electrical service to parts of the building was cut as a precaution. Cynthia stood in the parking lot watching firefighters move through the lobby. She kept saying the same thing. This can't be happening, but it was. And the strangest part was the new walkway, the Briar Promenade, the project Cynthia had rushed to finish. Its decorative lights were still glowing through the rain. The polished sign at the entrance stood above the floodwater like a monument. Behind it, the clubhouse was going dark section by section. By 1:30 in the morning, the lower level was effectively lost. And sometime after 2, Cynthia stopped asking me to fix it. She started asking everyone else how this could possibly have happened. By sunrise, she had already found the answer she wanted. The storm, she told anyone who would listen, that Lake Briar had been hit by an unpredictable natural disaster, a freak weather event. Something no reasonable person could have anticipated. I heard her say it while I was standing near the fire truck. I didn't argue. I just went home and picked up the folder. The county stormwater inspector arrived a little after 9 that morning. By then, the rain had weakened, but the damage was obvious. Mud covered the lower parking lot. Watermarks ran across the clubhouse doors. And the new promenade was still sitting exactly where the drainage channel used to be. I brought my folder outside. The inspector didn't want my opinion first. He wanted the site. So I walked him to the upper end of the old ditch. I showed him where runoff had collected, then where the channel had been filled, then the route the water had taken around the new walkway and toward the clubhouse. After that, I handed him the county plat. He unfolded it across the hood of his truck. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he pointed at the drainage easement. "Was this open before construction?" "Yes, and this is where they placed the fill." "Yes." Cynthia had come over with 2 board members. She immediately started explaining that the storm had been unusually severe. The inspector looked from the map to the walkway. Then back at Cynthia. "Where did you expect the water to go?" Nobody answered. He took photographs, measured elevations, checked the filled section, then asked Cynthia for the stormwater approvals and engineering documents. She said the property manager had them. The property manager said the contractor handled that. The contractor, when he arrived, said something Cynthia clearly didn't want to hear. "We built the plan the HOA gave us." By early afternoon, the county issued a preliminary correction notice. The drainage route had been materially altered. The filled section would have to be reviewed and, unless the HOA could produce an approved drainage modification, restored for the first time since this started. Cynthia wasn't telling everyone what was going to happen next. The county was, and that should have been the worst part of her day. It was, because that afternoon she made one more mistake. In front of 3 board members, she said, "No one ever warned me this could flood." I was standing 10 feet away holding the folder with her own replies inside it. I didn't say anything right away. I walked over to the hood of the county truck and opened the folder. The first thing I pulled out was the recorded drainage easement, then the county plat, then the letter I had sent before construction started. I handed it to one of the board members. Check the date he did. 6 weeks earlier, then I gave him the certified mail receipt, delivered, signed, received by the HOA office. Cynthia's expression changed. That does to prove I personally saw it. So I reached back into the folder. I pulled out her email, the one thanking me for my concern and telling me the board had already approved the project. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then I handed over the second warning, the one I had sent before the storm. Attached to it was Cynthia's reply. Please stop attempting to frighten residents over a landscaping project. One of the board members read it twice, then looked at her. You knew about this before the rain? Cynthia immediately changed direction. She said she had trusted the contractor. She said. The board had relied on professional advice. She said nobody had told her the risk was serious, so I showed them the sentence in my first letter. The one that specifically warned that obstructing the drainage route could create flooding upstream or downstream. The county inspector was standing close enough to hear everything. He looked at Cynthia, then at the board, then at the flooded clubhouse behind us. Nobody needed me to explain what had happened anymore. That was the strange thing about keeping records. For 6 weeks, Cynthia had treated every email, photograph, and receipt like meaningless paperwork. Now those same pieces of paper were doing something I never could have done by yelling. They were removing every excuse she had left. But the clubhouse damage was still only the beginning, because a few days later the HOA's insurance company asked for the exact same file. The HOA spent the next few days telling residents not to panic. They had insurance. That was the phrase Cynthia kept repeating. We recovered. At first, I think she genuinely believed it. Then the insurance adjuster started asking questions, not just about the rain, about the walkway. They wanted construction records, engineering drawings, permit approvals, board minutes, contractor documents, and most importantly, any written complaints or warnings the HOA had received before the loss. That changed the mood very quickly. The board's attorney contacted me and asked whether I would provide copies of my correspondence. I said yes. I sent exactly what I had, nothing more: the easement, the photographs, the certified letter, the county complaint, the storm warning, and Cynthia's replies a week later. Residents received a notice saying the claim was under extended review. Then came another notice. The carrier was disputing major portions of the loss connected to the drainage alteration. Their position was straightforward. The storm itself may have been natural, but the obstruction wasn't. The HOA had altered the site, failed to produce the approvals the insurer requested, and had proceeded after receiving written notice of a drainage risk. Under that policy, those facts mattered a lot. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about replacing some wet carpet. They were talking about electrical equipment, water remediation, mechanical systems, structural drying, drainage restoration, removing the promenade, legal fees, and potentially a special assessment on every homeowner in Lake Briar. That was when Cynthia finally lost the people she had spent months claiming to protect. Residents weren't angry because it rained. They were angry because they were being asked to pay for a decision they never knew had been challenged. At the emergency board meeting that Friday, the room was packed. People stood along the walls. Copies of my emails were already circulating, and Cynthia walked in carrying the same blue folder she had held beside the excavator 6 weeks earlier. Only now, nobody was listening to her like she was in charge. The meeting started with Cynthia trying to control the room. She blamed the storm, then the contractor, then the county. Then somehow me, she said. I had been hostile to the project from the beginning and had created unnecessary fear around what she still called a community improvement. That was when one of the residents interrupted her. Did he warn you before construction? The room went quiet. Cynthia hesitated. A board member reached for the remote. The projector came on. The first image was the county plat. The drainage easement ran across the screen in a clean line. The next image was my certified letter, date visible, delivery confirmation visible, then my first email, then Cynthia's reply, then the storm warning, then her second reply telling me to stop frightening residents. No one needed commentary. The timeline spoke for itself. A woman near the back asked, "Why did you keep building?" Cynthia started talking about legal advice. Someone else asked, "Where is the engineer's approval?" Another resident asked, "Why weren't we told there was a drainage complaint?" The questions started coming faster than Cynthia could answer them. And for the first time since I met her, she stopped sounding like the president of anything. She sounded like someone trying to explain why everyone else was responsible for a decision with her name all over it. By the end of the meeting, 2 board members had called for an independent review. A third moved to suspend Cynthia's authority over ongoing projects. Within days, she resigned. No dramatic arrest, no handcuffs, no federal agents. She didn't need any of that to lose. She lost the one thing she had spent months pretending to have control, and once she was gone. The new board had to deal with what she left behind. A flooded clubhouse, a disputed insurance claim, a damaged drainage system, and a walkway that should never have been built where it was. The first thing they did was remove it. The promenade came out faster than it had gone in. The new board hired an independent drainage engineer, reopened the original channel, and restored the slope around it. This time, they didn't try to make the water disappear, they worked with it. A few months later, a new pedestrian crossing went in, not another wall of compacted fill. A raised walkway with an open drainage path beneath it. The clubhouse eventually reopened after months of repairs. Lake Briar changed its rules too. Major construction projects required independent engineering review. Permit records had to be shared with residents, and no board president could push through a project while hiding written objections from the rest of the board. They even asked me to join a new infrastructure committee. I laughed. I am still not in your HOA, but I agreed to look over the drainage plans that fall. Another hard storm came through. I stood on my porch and watched the water gather at the top of the slope. It entered the restored channel, passed beneath the new walkway, then kept moving downhill exactly where it had always gone. No flooded parking lot, no firefighters, no dark clubhouse. Just water doing what water does when nobody tries to overrule gravity. My father used to say water remembers where it belongs. Turns out paperwork does too. So let me ask you this. If you had warned an HOA in writing, showed them the county records, and they still buried the drainage channel anyway, would you have done anything differently? Or would you have stepped back and let the paperwork speak for itself? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. And if you have ever dealt with an HOA that thought a board vote gave them more authority than a deed, an easement, or basic common sense. I want to hear that story too, because around here, the loudest person in the room doesn't always win. Sometimes the person keeping records does. Subscribe for the next one.